All right, good morning, everybody. How you doing? I'll tell you, I am pretty amped to be here. But before I kind of jump in, and do I got a time? I don't see a time, so I guess I go as long as I want. This is awesome. Hours. I do want to say this, okay? This is kind of a preamble here. Do not take for granted what's going on right here. I get a chance to travel not only, across the country and interact with a lot of church planners and a lot of spaces, a lot of cities and stuff, but what you're doing here in Fort Worth, through Plant Fort Worth, with 63 churches that are already coming together with a vision and dream of going, how do we plant 200 churches? I mean, that is a very, very special thing, okay? I'll tell you what, just do me a favor, turn to someone and you just pat them on the back and go like, this is a special thing, all right? This is a special thing. I'm telling you it is. And Chris and I were talking beforehand, he was like, what are you really excited about? I'll tell you, what you guys are doing right here, what you all are doing right here, this is what I'm excited about. Because when this kind of collaboration begins to happen in local churches like this, it does two things. It makes the pastors, because you're in relationships, healthier, which we've got to have, but it also exponentially increases the reproduction. A lot more church planting happens. The two things we need more, we need to be better leaders and we need more churches. And when you're doing this is the kind of stuff that happens. So anyway, I just want to applaud you guys. Nicely done, Plant Fort Worth, and good job, Ben. All right, let's give Ben a little love, right? Yeah, thanks for leading this. I'll tell you, do me a favor, do this, again, turn to the person on your left and on your right, if you got people on both sides, just say, hey, it's in you, it's in you, it's in you, okay? I want you to remember that, it's in you, it's in you. How many of you are, let's say you're in your 20s, 30s, okay, we're gonna make the 40-year-olds feel good, 40s, 20, 30s, 40s, there we go, all right, nice. I wanna talk to you about how to unleash the movement that's inside of you. But we're not going to be in a hurry about this because we're going to talk about the next 30, 40, maybe 50 years for some of you in your 20s. Now, how many of you you're in your 50s or 60s, 50s or 60s, 50s or 60s? All right, no, don't be embarrassed. We're going to talk to you about the next decade or 2 decades, right? 3 decades, woo! And how to unleash the movement that's inside of you, all right? Do me a favor, hold your hand out like this. Go ahead and just make it into a ball, make it into a ball. Let's just pretend, work with me. This whole content is something, I'm working on a book right now, so I'm kind of making this up as we go along, and I'm trying it out on you guys, so we'll see how this works, okay? Right there, see that ball? Let's just say that's Jesus, all right? Hello, Jesus, all right? That's Jesus. Are you with me? You guys aren't with me. I've already lost you. We're going to say this is Jesus, okay? This is Jesus. If this is Jesus, okay, hold there. If this is Jesus, you're not doing it. Come on, there we go. This is Jesus. If this is Jesus, everything that's needed to save you exists right here, right? To save you from your sins in the past, to give you a purpose for your present, and to give you a hope for your future. Everything right there exists right there to save you. And if this is Jesus, then everything that's needed actually to save the world, can I get an amen? Exists right in here. Do you agree with that? Yeah, everything exists right here. So what we understand in the gospel to be is that Jesus decides to come to earth. He lives here. He dies. And then he rises again. And before he leaves, he says, here's what I'm going to do. I want you all to go from Jerusalem, your own Jerusalem, your Fort Worth, to Judea, to Samaria, to the ends of the earth. That's what he said, correct? Okay, we're still on the same page. Good. That's what Jesus said. But as he says that, how did he say we're going to do that? What's it say at the beginning of Acts 1:8? Well, before the witnesses part. My spirit's what? Is going to come within you, right? My spirit is going to be within you. So here's what I want you to do. Take that Jesus, and I want you to put it right next to your chest. All right? We take this I think we've forgotten this. The Jesus that saves you from your past and in your present and your future, the Jesus that has the power to save the whole world, the Jesus that left heaven, come to earth, died and resurrected again, said, here's the strategy, people, to go from Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and earth. I'm going to embed myself inside you. Yeah. Everything that's needed to create a movement that can transform Fort Worth, that can transform Texas, can transform our country and the world, exists right in here. Can I get an amen on that? And what I want to talk about is how do we unleash that, both in you, but now think about this, not just in you, but in all the people that sit in your chairs and sit in your pews. It exists, for those who have said yes to Jesus, it exists inside of them. It exists inside of them. That kind of movement-making potential exists inside of there. So how do we do it? I want to start with Psalm 119:1, and it says this: "You are blessed when you stay the course, walking steadily on the road revealed by God." You are blessed when you stay the course, walking steadily on the road revealed by God. And what I want to talk to you about is I want to talk to you about what it means to be, a multiplier, okay? And we're going to throw it up here. A multiplier is just simply this. It's a healthy, we intentionally are going to use that word because we're going to talk about being both healthy and multiplying, a healthy disciple-making leader that champions reproduction. Because I think that's what the Jesus inside of you wants to do. I think that's what the Jesus inside of you wants to do. Let me tell you, I've never had a, how are we doing here? Oh, it's I'm experimenting with a beard. I didn't shave over Christmas for a few days. I just kind of decided to go. So, I've never had a church planter tell me, my dream is to start a new church that a decade from now will plateau and will never ever start a new church. And while I've never heard that said, it accurately describes many of the churches that dot the landscape of the United States. I've also never had a church leader tell me, you know what? I hope 15 years from now, I end up 50 pounds overweight, divorced, and doing things that compromise my core convictions. And while those words have never been sincerely spoken, you see it happening on social media, every week. How does that happen? Because we start out with such big dreams, right? We start out with these big dreams, and we also start with a commitment to kind of personal health. Warren Bird tells us right now, big dreams. He tells us, the latest study, he said 43% of churches planted in the last 5 years say part of their vision for the future is a multiplying network. The very thing that you all are doing. 43% of the church plants in the last 5 years, that's thousands of church plants are saying, we want to someday, it's a vision, not a reality, but a vision. This is what we want to see happen. So we got big aspirations, big dreams as leaders. And also, on the other hand, I would say post-COVID, I consistently hear leaders say, you know what? I refuse to sacrifice my health and my family on the altar of ministry. We want to do it in a healthy way. So we start out hoping our leadership's going to be marked by church multiplication and also personal health, but somewhere along the way we tend to drift. Our leadership drifts in the status quo, and our personal life drifts toward unhealth. And here's the thing, and this is why I want to talk to you about the next decade or 2 decades or 3 or 4 or 5 in some cases, because it doesn't happen all at once. Not often, anyway. It occurs slowly, 1 day at a time, 1 year at a time, 1 decade at a time. And here's the way I'd frame it. We end up someplace we never, ever intended to be. We end up unhealthy. And we end up not making the impact we once dreamed of. There's a guy by the name of Clayton Christensen. I don't know if that rings a bell for you. Clayton Christensen was a renowned professor at Harvard Business School, kind of preceded Peter Drucker in that world, not at Harvard, but in that world. But Christensen would always finish his favorite course each year by telling the same story. It was a story of his own class that graduated from HBS. And the story went something like this. This is how he did every year, same story, same class. He'd say, every 5 years, Christians would say, we would have a reunion because he went to Harvard. He said the school was brilliant at getting us all back together for these reunions. They would have great food. They'd have brilliant speakers. They'd put on huge galas. At my 5-year reunion, there was a great turnout. Looking around, everyone seemed so polished and prosperous. You couldn't help but think we were a part of something very, very special. My classmates had great jobs. They lived in exotic locations, and most of them seemed to have married people much better looking than they were. Our lives were fantastic on every level. That was our 5-year reunion. But I came back for our 10th reunion at Harvard. Some things we never expected became increasingly common after 10 years. Many discovered that while they were making good money, they didn't like what they were doing to make the money. Many also found themselves divorced or in unhappy marriages. Some were living on two different coasts from their ex and never seeing their kids. It was strange because, this is Clayton Christian talking, because my classmates were some of the brightest and most decent people I'd ever met. I took note, but I couldn't figure out what went wrong. That was our 10-year reunion. Then came my 25th reunion, and the problems were only worse. One of my classmates was a guy by the name of Jeffrey Skilling. I don't know if that rings a bell for anybody here. Skilling had risen to be the CEO of Enron. But because of a scandal, he was not only fired, but was now in jail. I knew from my 4 years at Harvard that Jeff Skilling was a good man. He was smart. He worked hard. He loved his family. But he was now twice divorced, alienated from his family, and doing time after being convicted on multiple felony charges. And Christians would say, I know Jeff Skilling. He never intended to be divorced, file for bankruptcy, or end up in jail. And he said it wasn't just Skilling. Another classmate was in jail for insider trading. Still another was doing time for having a sexual relationship with a teenager who had worked on his political campaign, and still others were worse. And then Clayton Christian, this last lecture, on the last day of this class, his favorite class, he would end the school year by talking to his students, and he would say, I want to talk to you about three things. I want to talk to you about how to be successful in a career that will bring your life purpose and meaning. I want to talk to you about how to stay happily married to one person your whole life. And I want to talk to you about how to stay out of jail. All right, I want you to ponder this for a look. Why? Why would Clayton Christensen think that it was necessary to make that the last lecture every year to some of the best and the brightest that Harvard had to offer? I think Christensen knew that leaders drift. They don't intend to, but they do. They drift into mediocrity, and as people, we drift mind, body, and spirit into lethargy. Proverbs 14:12 tells us, and I think it describes this, what I'm going to just kind of call unintentional drift. It says there's a way that appears right, but in the end, it leads to, help me out, what? That's exactly right, death. So I want to kind of hang on that just for a second before I go get to on the solution side of this, because I think this problem of drifting is a real problem, I think, for leaders. I mean, let's say you're walking down the block. You're walking down the block of your street, wherever you live. Think about where you live, right? You got where you live? You're walking down the street. You're going to go from your house down the block to a friend's. And if you drift by just 1 degree, guess what? You still end up at your friend's house. Nobody notices. But if I was to fly from, let's say, San Francisco to LA, I get in a plane in San Francisco in the Bay Area, and then I fly to LA and I drift by a degree, guess what? I end up 6 miles into the ocean. I end up someplace I never intended to be. Even worse, let's say I take off in Washington, D.C. Well, let's say LA. You go from LA to Washington, D.C. You fly from LA to Washington, D.C., and you're just 1 degree, you just drift. You find yourself 46 miles off course. You're somewhere in Baltimore. Someplace you never, ever intended to be. And here's what I want to do. I thought maybe it'd be good for us just to kind of sound the alarm, because it feels like, hey, we got a lot of momentum going here, and this is good. But I want to sound the alarm right now. Beware of drifting, because it happens ever so slowly. And unless you take, I guess I'm here to tell you, you don't have to be in a huge hurry about this. But unless you take caution on your internal world and your external world, you could end up another sad story. So that's why these words in Psalm 119:1 that says, you are blessed when you stay the course, walking steadily in the road revealed by God. I mean, I think that's what Eugene Peterson was talking about when he said a slow obedience, right, in the same direction. And so here's, with that kind of as a back, I want to talk to you about being a multiplier. And this is our definition for multiplier: a healthy, disciple-making leader that champions reproduction. And maybe in some settings, in some periods in history, we wouldn't necessarily have to put that first word in there, but as we thought about multiply, we felt like, you know what, in the context and the time that we currently live in, we have to be explicit about this. No, it's a healthy disciple-making leader that champions reproduction. And that's who I want to be, and I hope that's who you want to be. So, as we stay the course, I want to talk to you about your internal world and your external world. Let's go to the next slide. I'm still kind of working this tool. See if this tool helps you out here, and I hope this is a tool. Feel free to take pictures, share it with whoever you want. But the internal world, what you're going to discover, the internal world, I'm going to talk to you about real quickly, 4 gauges. 4 gauges that you need to routinely check so that you don't drift. You don't end up, I don't want any one of you to suddenly wake up and end up someplace you never intended to be. 4 gauges. But then we're going to talk about your external world. And in the external world, I think there's 4 practices. And these are 4 practices that almost anybody can do. And they kind of build on each other. And as you build on these others, what you're going to find is that leads to multiplication, and multiplication that leads to momentum, and that momentum leads to movement. The internal world brings transformation, allows the Jesus inside of you to be who he wants to be, wants you to be. And the external world, okay, allows Jesus to accomplish through you the things that he would like to accomplish, the Jesus inside of you. So let's talk about the internal world, all right? And I see a lot of you got paper and pen. That's awesome. Or if you got an iPad or something, I would encourage you to take notes. I got this awesome tool, which I just got exposed to this morning. And the internal world, there's a very simple tool that I've been using for probably 15 years now. And to measure, and these 4 gauges of the internal world are simply this, okay? And go ahead and just, you can draw this if you want. I just call them the RPMs. And the R stands for relational. The P stands for physical. The M stands for mental. Okay? And the last S stands for spiritual. And and here's the thing. Don't make this harder than it is. Every day, and I brought it up here just as an example. This is my journal. Every day in my journal, one of the things that I do is I write it right there. You can see it right there. And I give myself a score, how I'm doing every day. I mean, literally, and again, for some of you, you're going like, I'm never going to do this, right? You figure it out, though, okay? Because you need to figure out something for yourself so you don't drift. But this will hopefully spark something for you, because this totally works for me. And so every day, and this takes me, I'm not even kidding, it takes me like 3 minutes. Not even 3 minutes, maybe 2 or 3 minutes every day. Just to reflect on how am I doing in my internal life. Are you tracking with me? So important. So, like for example, let me just kind of give you a few different ways. For a while, you can use colors, like just to decide how you're doing. You know, red, green. You know, that's supposed to be yellow there, right? Sometimes you use colors. That's very simple. You notice, actually, I have highlighters, so I've been trying colors. I'm experimenting in some different ways. Another way you can actually do it, too, let's get rid of these. You can also do arrows if you want. I'm going up, I'm going down, I'm status quo. No, I'm up again. And this box over here is a cumulative score, by the way. We'll get to that. Does that make sense? I'm trying to make this as practical as I possibly can for you guys. But one of the things that most of the time what I've actually done is I'll use numbers. And it's just, and again, this is not scientific. This is just you in your journal, or you on a piece of paper, or you on your iPad, okay? So for example, like, let's say today, I'm gonna go ahead. Relationally, how am I doing? Sue and I had a date last night, thanks to you guys. We got in a little early. Actually, we got in a little late, so we couldn't hang out, so we actually went out for dinner. Things are going pretty good with my wife and I, Sue and I. At least, how are we doing? Okay, I got a thumbs up. Okay, I wanted to make sure. It's good. that was risky, you're right. But I basically, when I'm doing this, I'm thinking in terms of like my most important relationships. Sue and I, my kids, and then some friends. How am I doing? On a scale of 1 to 10. 10 is awesome, 1 is sucks, 5 is average. And don't overthink this. I mean, you only got 2 or 3 minutes. But the fact that you're reflecting on this, just asking how many, that's the important thing. How am I doing physically? I got up this morning, I ran. One of the things, you have to know how you're wired. I know how I'm wired. I have to have a goal in order to kind of get me motivated. So like last September, my daughter and I, we ran the Berlin Marathon together. And guess what? I mean, it was an awesome experience because also on the relational side, we got to do a lot of our long runs together, which was fantastic. But on the physical side, having that goal, it got me going because the last thing I want in the whole world is to be somewhere in Berlin on mile 22 and my daughter's going like, come on, Dad, you can do this. Come on, Dad. No. So I'm putting in the miles, right? I got a half marathon coming up in April in D.C. So that motivates me. So how am I doing there? I'm going to say I got a subordinate rate, so I got an 8. You also have to remember on Strength Finders, one of my strengths is positivity. There you go. So all my numbers are going to be a little higher than they really are. Okay? But that doesn't matter. The really important thing is just reflecting on this. How am I doing? Okay, then how am I doing mentally? When I first started this 15 years ago, it was more of a John Maxwell, leaders are learners kind of thing. And like, am I staying current with the news? What books am I reading? Well, I'll tell you what, though. I mean, you go through COVID, all of a sudden, that mentally, you're going like, no, how am I feeling? How am I doing emotionally? And there was a real shift for me. So literally, I will actually kind of Google, the feeling chart? You guys know the feeling chart? Okay, thank you. There's one woman who knows the feeling chart, of course. Guys, you ought to check out the feeling chart. Because here's what happens. Like Ben, if you said, how you feeling? Here's what I do. How you feeling, Dave? Here's what I would say. I'd go like, I look up like this. I think I feel, right? I think, and I have to stop to think about how I feel, what's going on. And so I'll pull out the feeling chart to diagnose how I'm feeling. How am I doing? And so right now, there's some stress I'm feeling on some things. So, and again, I gave it an average, but being positivity, that's probably really more like a 3, okay? And then spiritually, how are we doing spiritually? I'm doing pretty good spiritually. I journal. We're trying a new thing with Sabbath, so it's kind of moving in the right direction, so I'll give that about a 6. Now, when I was doing this with numbers too, what I would do is also keep score. I'd say, okay, 7 plus 8 plus 5, that is, that's 18, right? 7, 8, 5, is that 20? It's 18. Thank you very much. Because what I'm trying to do, so that's 18. If you divide it by 3, then the average is 6. 6 plus 6, that gives you like an average of 6. So I just give myself a score of 6. Because what I wanted to do, here's what I'm trying to do. What I try to do is try to weight the spiritual a little more. I wanted the spiritual to weigh as much as everything else combined. All right. Now, if that confused you guys, you're going like, what the heck was that? Here's what you need to do, though. I'm telling you, you're going to drift. If you don't have some intentional way with your internal world of just reflecting on it, how are you doing? And again, I would encourage, just experiment with this. A lot of folks around me have started experimenting, and it's helpful to them. Maybe you just use colors, maybe you just use numbers, maybe you use arrows and dots, but just if you will just pause every day and go, how am I doing relationally? How am I doing physically? How am I doing mentally? How am I doing spiritually? And make sure your trajectory is in the right direction. I'm telling you. Here's part of the motivation for me. I was in a small group. I was in a small group with the largest churches, the pastors of the largest church in Chicago. I don't have to name the names. You know some of the names. There's about a dozen of us. Some of you know all the names. It was the kind of group we would meet like 6 times a year. And we would start at 10 and we'd go to 2, we'd have lunch together. And I'm telling you, when I showed up, I had a list of questions. Because, I mean, you just, to spend time with those folks, a list of questions. And I would leave with a whole iPad full of ideas and answers and next steps. It was, in many ways, an awesome group. But if I tried to reassemble that group today, about half the seats would be empty. About half the seats would be empty. And it wasn't because they weren't productive. These are some of the most productive people, okay, I've ever been around. But it's because they drifted. And I know this crowd here, okay, you guys were showing up on a Wednesday. We got a lot of apostolic, a lot of evangelistic, a lot of, hey, I want to do awesome stuff, and I love that, okay? But I just want to say a little bit. You don't have to be quite as much in a hurry as maybe you think. And you need to pay more attention to your internal world, because if you don't pay your internal world, you're going to be one of those empty seats that someone else is telling the story about. And I don't want that for you. And we don't need that as a country. We don't need that in Fort Worth. All right? Enough on that? Is that sinking in? Okay. Let's move on then. I got a lot more I could do on that one. Okay, so that's your internal world. Because here's the thing. Don't forget this. You're going to reproduce who you are. Right? I mean, guys, you want the people, you want the men in your church to be great dads and great husbands? Be a great dad, be a great husband. It's going to happen that way. Same thing, ladies. You want the people around you to be great moms, to be great wives. Be a great mom, be a great wife. And I'm not putting the pressure on you. I'm just saying, just try to do the best you can by reflecting. You don't have to be perfect. We just sang a lot about grace. Man, that was awesome. You got all that. But let's pay attention to our internal world. Okay, because you're going to reproduce who you are. So once you got that internal world going, now, okay, and it's allowing Jesus to transform you, right? The Jesus inside you to transform you and who he wants you to be. Now let's talk about your external world. The external world, in the same way the internal world has 4 gauges, I think your external world, and now we're going to pay attention up here, has 4 practices. Let me give you these 4 practices. Simple practices. We just have to do them. And the first one is what every multiplier should be doing. It's making disciple makers. Making disciple makers. I got the privilege to be in Africa, when was it, last April. And I was there with one of our New Thing churches there, Worship Harvest Church. Remarkable, remarkable church. If any of you are going to be at Exponential in March down in Orlando, Apostle Moses Mukisa will be one of our main speakers. And I got to be at Worship Harvest Church, where he's the lead pastor, or I guess apostle, whatever. I don't know how you get to be an apostle, but I guess he did. That's another, come back next year. We're going to tell you how to be an apostle. But what they're doing is awesome. It is so awesome. In the last 5 years, they've gone from 5 locations to 121 locations. I mean, it is a juggernaut. What's fascinating, too, is the infrastructure is not just missional communities, but then there's communities and churches of networks. And they have one young lady who's leading 21 churches, another young lady who's leading 25 churches of their 118. It's just amazing. But here's the thing. He would tell you this. It all comes back to making disciples. None of that happens if you don't make disciple makers. In fact, I was there, and you would see people walking around wearing T-shirts. This is a T-shirt that most of them had, and they were wearing it saying, "Who is your 12? Who is your 12?" And here's the thing. If you want Jesus to do through you the stuff he was trying to do, it starts by you doing the stuff that Jesus did. Make disciple makers. And so I would ask you, who can you name the people? Can you name the people that you're trying to make into disciple makers, that you're working with to make disciple making? I mean, I'm thinking about some of the people in my neighborhood that I'm praying for using our blessed practices. That's part of my hope. I'm thinking about the small group that Sue and I lead on Tuesday night, all right? Rick and Melinda, Eddie and Kristen, Steve and Catherine. Can you name people? I had a conversation with Leon Scrump. Some of you may know Leon's down in Atlanta and Resonate. And I just loved it because we were having this conversation, and he just started naming 4 or 5 people. He has them over for lunch. He hangs out with them. You can name the people, okay? This first practice, if you're actually doing it, you'll be able to name the people. That's the first practice. Then that's the second practice, okay? The second practice is establishing spiritual communities. Establishing spiritual communities. You may call them small groups. You might call them missional communities. You may have some other name. But whatever you call them, relationships are always the catalyst for growth. And I might get some disagreement on this. And I love what happens on Sundays at our church. I love the opportunity to either hear good teaching and preaching or actually deliver it. But I would still say it's relationships. Relationships are the catalyst for spiritual growth. And that's what the Jesus inside of you did. In fact, if you go back, this is how he spent most of his time. I may touch on this a little bit because we're going to talk about Hero Maker in the next session that I get a chance to do. But Warren Bird, my co-author, did a little homework on this. And what he discovered, what he found, is he went back. You take all the Gospels, right? Take the Gospels, all the activities of Jesus' life. He spent 73% of his time with just the few and 27% with the crowds, the masses, teaching and preaching. So almost like three-fourths of his time was spent in this small community, okay? Establishing the spiritual community that was then going to multiply, was going to create the movement. And I think it'd be great for us to kind of reflect, okay, so how about you? How are you allocating your time? Could you look at it and go like, yeah, three-fourths of my time is establishing the spiritual community. And 1/4 is waiting on Sunday for the large group event. So if you're thinking about, okay, how do we allow the Jesus inside us to do the stuff that he would do? You make disciple makers, you establish spiritual communities, and then the third thing, out of those communities, okay, and again, you're talking about making disciple makers, establish spiritual communities. We're just talking about, I don't know, it could be just 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 16 people. This is not really, really complex stuff. This is the kind of stuff everybody in your church should grab a hold of so far and do. Work on your internal life. Here's what I do with my external life. Make disciple makers. I establish spiritual communities. And then when given opportunity, you mobilize new leaders. It's that easy, right? It is that easy. I want to tell you about a guy named Rick. Rick's a guy who's in my small group. Rick was a guy who's been really successful in sales. Probably, the last 20 years, same company. He loves, has a huge heart for the special needs community. I mean, he's the guy who comes to our small group on Tuesday. Am I right with this, Sue? And I mean, almost, I'll say every other week, when you get to the application part, it doesn't matter what the application is, it comes back to his kids and those families with special needs, and he gets teary-eyed, he talks about it, and that's just where his heart is. He comes to one of our exponential conferences, a national one we had in Chicago. A guy named James Meeks is speaking, closing session. James says this, he says, you know what, listen, what God is looking for is people who are available. You don't have to have a building. You just need to be available. He's talking about church planting. He said you don't need to have resources. You just need to be available. You don't have to go to seminary. You just need to be available. God's looking for people that are available. Rick's sitting out there and taking it all in. And Rick's going like, I'm available. And he goes forward and says he wants to plant a church. I have no idea what's going on, right? Guy in my small group's going forward, he wants to plant a church. He comes to me after and says, you know what? Could I plant a church for families who have kids who have special needs? Because so many of them won't show up on Sundays because they just feel out of place because the kids do things that everybody kind of looks at them. Could I do that? I was like, let's do it. I'm leaning into it, right? What's funny is, I don't know if it's really funny, within 2 months, he loses his job. He loses his job in sales. He was doing pretty good. You know what his reaction is? I'm more available than ever. We put him through our micro-church training, and guess what? He on Sunday night in our gym at one of our locations, he brings together we were there the first Sunday. It was unbelievable. It was so unbelievable, so awesome. They had 115 people there that were all part of the special needs community. And they've been going for 2 years now. We don't pay him, right? I don't even think it occurs to him that we should pay him. This is like the greatest thing you ever had to do. And I'll never forget, in our small group, okay, this is how we did ordination, okay? In our small group, we had him sit on the coffee table, and everybody in our small group just put our hands on him, and we said, hey, Rick, we are so proud of you. We clearly see this is a passion that God's put in your heart. You have a gift for it, what you're doing, and we just want to pray for you and commission you. You go. And we commissioned him right there. That's how I don't know. I know we got different denominations and stuff and all that kind of stuff to work through. I don't have to. You guys have to. But it can be that simple, okay? It can be that simple, right? You make disciple makers, you establish spiritual communities, and then you mobilize new leaders. And what happens out of that? You launch church expressions. And here's the thing. Again, I'm pretty simple about this kind of stuff, and you guys will have to work it out yourself. I think a church, it could be micro, it could be macro, it could be meta. To me, my simple ecclesiology, and you don't have to adopt this, you just listen to it and see what you think. I think where you have a community of people on mission together, where Jesus is Lord, you got a church. Amen. I got one amen. Okay, that's not too bad. A community of people on mission. But work it out. Figure it out for yourself. What's your simple ecclesiology? Because we just gave life to a church right out of that small group that meets on Tuesday night in the Bole's house. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds a lot more like what happened in the New Testament to me than kind of the way some of us are orchestrating things. But you got to figure it out. But I'm telling you, here's the thing. If you'll just pay real close attention to your internal life, and then just do those 4 simple practices. And here's the thing. Here's how you really leverage it. Then you teach your people. Pay attention to those 4 gauges inside so you don't drift. You don't end up someplace you never intended to be. And you do these 4 simple practices. Make disciple makers. Establish spiritual communities. When you get the opportunity, you mobilize new leaders. And now if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, we call it a duck. You launch church expressions. Church, right? Guess what happens? I'm telling you, over time, and this has been my own experience, as I'm telling you, God is so kind and God is so good. When we planted Community Christian Church, it was 10 years before we ever planted a church. So stupid. I don't know what we were doing, okay? I mean, we had a dream, and some of you better relate to this. Oh, we want to plant churches. It says we're going to plant. It took us 10 years before we planted a church. But God was kind, and we took that church, and the next year we planted one in Southern California, the next year in Boston, the next year in New York. And then pretty soon, we put those churches into a network, kind of like what you guys are doing here. And we started not only reproducing churches, but then also reproducing networks. And then pretty soon, all of a sudden, some folks in other parts of the world start hearing about what we're doing. And we just called it New Thing. We gave it a name, just made up something. We're calling it New Thing. That's an Old Testament verse. It works. Behold, we're doing a new thing. And that last year, this is again by God's kindness and God's grace, we were in 39 countries and we helped plant over 11,000 churches. But I'm telling you, but you know what? That's not really that surprising because guess what? Who's inside you? Right? He can do that, can't he? He can do that. And I'm telling you, he wants to do it in you and through you. And don't forget this part, in you and through every person that's in your church. All right? Let's pray.